Welcome to the Claiming Williams Keynote. My name is April Owens, and I am a senior at the college. First, if you'll allow me to read the land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that Williams College stands on the ancestral homelands of the Stockbridge-Munsee Mohicans, who are the indigenous peoples of the region now called Williamstown. Following tremendous hardship after being forced from their valued homelands, they continued as a sovereign tribal nation in Wisconsin, which is where they reside today. We pay honor and respect to their ancestors, past and present, as we commit to building a more inclusive and equitable space for all. Thank you all for being here today for the 2024 Claiming Williams Keynote. The driving questions of today's event are, how did you get here? And how do you stay here? For my part, I got here from a lower income community, and I was encouraged to apply to Williams not through my under-resourced and overworked high school counselors, nor through knowing people who came here, but instead through various scholarship organizations, mentors, and events just like these that work to make a world-class education, specifically a world-class liberal arts education, more accessible. How do I stay here? Well, I stay here because of the generous support, resources, and opportunities that I'm surrounded by on a daily basis. I want more students like myself to experience the joys and benefits of an educational experience like the one I've had here at Williams, and that's what today is all about. With that said, I want to thank all the donors who support Claiming Williams. Your support for this day goes a long way in helping the college community come together, learn from and build awareness of roadblocks, and move forward effectively. I also want to thank the Claiming Williams Steering Committee for making this event possible. And I want to send a special thank you to the Bear family, who have generously supported Claiming Williams for years through the Bear Family Fund for Diversity and Inclusion. I would now like to pass the mic to President Maud, who will be introducing the conversation between Ruth Simmons and Leticia S. Haynes. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. It's so wonderful to see you. I hope you've had a really active day of learning, and whether you proposed or led a session or just participated in the day's events, thank you so much. I have a couple of other thank yous that I'm going to offer this evening. Some you've just heard, but we want multiple layers of gratitude in allowing this day to come about. So first I want to acknowledge the Davis family. This month, people are moving into the new Davis Center. Thank you. It really is a wonderful building, and I hope you'll come to the grand opening celebration in April. The new building is part of a continuing evolution and work by Williams people to make our community a home for everyone. And this crucial work owes so much to the Davis family's vision. And while I'm thanking families, I do also want to thank the Bear family, some of the members of whom are with us here this evening, who have loyally and very, very, very generously supported Claiming Williams and our work since 2017 through the Bear Family Fund for Diversity and Inclusion. Thank you so much. And finally, a thank you to some key staff and faculty. First, our Claiming Williams co-chairs, D. Clinton Williams from the Office of Institutional Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I just heard him say, I don't have to do anything else tonight. He's just here to listen. The day has gone so well thanks to your hard work. And he is joined in that hard work with his co-chair, Professor Sarah LaLumia. Thank you also, Sarah, for everything you've done. And of course, there is a wonderful steering committee of students who put in so much time and energy into this. So thank you to you all for everything you've done. And also to Nat Montoya Barnes and Carrie Green from the class of '84 who organized all the logistics. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So we want Williams to be a place that values diversity of thought and intellectual engagement. We carve this day out of the academic calendar every year so that we can engage with questions of what it means to be a community and to belong. And it's these folks and so many others who are here in this room, all of you who make this discussion possible. So please, a round of applause for you as well. Thank you. So today's keynotes are one way that we seek to inspire such conversations. Our guest speakers bring perspectives that stretch us beyond our own experiences. And it's in that spirit that it's really a great personal pleasure for me to introduce tonight's guest. After serving as president of Smith College, Ruth Simmons came to Brown University as president during the early years of my own professional life. I hadn't gone very far in my administrative career at that time, and for the most part, I didn't really work with Ruth directly, as I was busy teaching classes, doing research, and moving through the milestones that mark a young professor's life. So she probably had no idea until maybe now how much I learned from observing her. Watching her at work, I saw how a skilled leader could help an institution and a community transform itself. It was a realization that transformed my own career too, albeit at a distance. You could call the approach a kind of public mentorship. In a talk at Brown last September, President Simmons said, and I'm quoting, "I was lucky to come to understand that mentors weren't always the people that you might expect." In her own remarks, she was referring to the lessons one can learn from one's critics. I have a few of those mentors myself. But another interpretation is that learning opportunities can come from any direction at any time. And it's a reminder that we ourselves don't know whom we might be mentoring through our actions. She was one of my mentors, since by watching her at a distance, I observed what it took to move a large and diverse institution forward with vision and with purpose and with determination and with strength. Ruth Simmons leads and lives with the awareness that all of her actions are an organic extension of her work as an educator. Her incredible talent for this approach made a difference in my own life, and I'm glad you'll now have the chance to be mentored by her too. This event is in the form of a conversation between President Simmons and our own Vice President of Institutional Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Leticia Smith Evans-Haynes from the class of 1999. Many of you know Leticia already, but for those who don't, she and her team have worked hard to make Williams a more inclusive, diverse, and equitable place. Prior to Williams, she directed the education practice at the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, where she worked to ensure that all students had equal access to educational opportunities. She spent much of her own career working as a lawyer and educator before coming here. So I think you can agree with me that this has the makings of a fascinating conversation, and I hope you'll bring your own perspectives to the Q&A afterwards. And now please join me in welcoming Ruth Simmons and Leticia Haynes.
Good evening, everyone. It is great to be here, and it's great to see so many of you here. We are going to have a conversation for some time and then open the floor up for questions. So somebody will give me a nod when it's time to stop talking. It's really a privilege and honor to be here, and I always like to start out by saying I myself am here because I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. You are definitely one of those giants. There are people who, in my life, before I even became a person on this earth, fought for people like me to have access to everything that I deserve to have access to. So I want to thank you for being one of those giants and for being here. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But I want to open up because I recognize not everyone has had the opportunity to read your book, which is a phenomenal piece of work. And I just want to start by asking, why did you write this book? It's on.
I don't have to do anything?
You don't have to do anything, just talk.
How lovely. First of all, let me say how pleased I am to be here. I don't know why it took me so long to get to Williams. But I think today starts to make up for it. It's been a riveting experience in so many different ways to get to know this wonderful campus. And when I walked into this venue tonight and looked up and around, I thought, how wonderful this is. On university campuses, we enjoy very special places. And I think sometimes we may not understand that not all of the world is privileged to enjoy spaces like this. So I'm very grateful that we have donors and alumni and others who want to make sure our students get the best environment in which to study. That's not what you asked me. Okay. This is just a sign of what's to come. Okay. I reflected a good deal after I retired from Brown about, and even during my time at Brown, about what I could say to my students. And I had a growing sense that although I endeavored to help them understand what their path could be, I think that they were, for the most part, misrepresenting my own path. In brief, I thought that they saw some glamour in what I had achieved. And imagined that I was perhaps more able, perhaps more important than I actually was. So I wanted to write this to tell them the truth of who I was and where I came from. But I put the writing project aside at Brown because I was too busy to finish it at Brown. But when I retired and went on to serve as president of an HBCU, I thought about it again. Because if the students at Brown had elevated me to this position of whatever it was even worse at Prairie View, the way that they looked at me, the way that they thought of me. And I knew I needed to tell them how much I was just like them. I needed them to know where I came from and how I managed to shape a life, because I wanted to explain to them how they could live and shape their lives. And so I took it up again when COVID came and decided that I would deliver this as a gift to my students. So that's what impelled me to write it, so for young people to understand the way that a life can be put together, no matter what circumstances, no matter what beginnings, no matter what impediments, and so forth.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I know I've heard you say there's no one path, and that is something that you hope your students take away. I just want to go back now to your upbringing in the segregated South, and my own family, parents grew up in the segregated South. Can you paint a picture, if you will, for the audience of what the segregated South was like, and also talk about what you saw in the education space there? Did you know that your schools were different? Were there different resources? Just what did you experience?
Well, we probably don't have enough time for me to depict that, but most people have read about and heard about the very sad story of our history, our racial history in this country. I was born in a small town in East Texas at a time when all blacks, virtually all blacks living in the rural South at least, were laborers in what many people call the follow-on to slavery, and that is the sharecropping system. So my family lived on a large farm with 100 other families in a shack, and their responsibility was to work the fields, largely cotton. And the thing about this experience was that it was the responsibility even of children to work the fields. And so our day involved getting up and preparing to go to the fields and working all day and coming home, and that was it every day. That was the reality of my family. It was not so much my reality because I'm the youngest of 12 children. And being the last, I didn't experience the full measure of the sharecropping system, which was, for children, of course, you couldn't go to school every day because it was more important to support the economy of cotton. And so most of my older siblings didn't go to school every day, and therefore they couldn't finish school. All of them had to get a GED later in life after they moved to the city. However, because I was the youngest, I had the extreme advantage of being able to go to school. And that made all the difference, of course, in my life, the fact that I was able to go to school. What life was like on a day-to-day basis outside of work was a deeply segregated existence where it was understood you can only associate with blacks. And that is to say, in a social sense. We would occasionally go to the town where whites could be seen, but we could not step outside of the rules of how our behavior had to be, which meant we couldn't go into certain places. In the theater in town, there was one theater, and blacks were not allowed to sit with whites in the theater. We could not go into a restaurant or any other facility like that where whites were present. We couldn't drink out of the proverbial fountain because blacks could not in any way mix with whites. So I grew up being admonished by my parents. There were certain ways to behave around whites, to stay in my place, to not speak out, to always defer to whites. And I always say my mother and father were wonderful because they did this marvelous thing for us. And that is, they taught us how to live until we were adults. And many families did not have that luxury because for violating the rules, you could be summarily disciplined. And of course, in many cases, blacks were killed for minor omissions. But my family, my parents were very serious about what we could and could not do. And we learned that from an early age. I did not really have the experience of getting to know whites until much later in my life. And one of the most important things to me, having had that experience of racism and racial hatred, was to have a life where I could never, ever succumb to that. And so my education early on really involved me in a process to try to get to know different people, to try to reach beyond my sphere of understanding, and to try to embrace in a sense, the whole of humanity. And I was bent on doing that as a young person because of what segregation, what I had experienced with segregation in my life.
Thank Thank you for sharing that. I want to ask whether you felt as a young person at any point a need to support those who were supporting you. You talked about community, your family, your parents, you just spoke of them. Did you ever feel or question what you could do or think about what you could do to support them? As you just mentioned, they were obviously navigating and helping your family navigate the segregated South and systems of oppression and racism. And you had the opportunity to go to school. Your siblings did not. Did you ever at some point think about that, or?
Not when I was very young. When I was very young, I was very selfish. I'm the youngest. And so I was mostly bent on what I could do and what I could enjoy. And I didn't quite understand that I had some remarkable person in my life who, in the most indirect way, on a day-to-day basis, taught me about how to be in the world as a very young person. And so my mother had an 8th grade education, and she had never really seen very much of the world outside of her very small setting, but she knew everything about life. And one of the things that she insisted is that we show respect for other people, that we care about other people, and that we never think ourselves better than anybody else. And of course, I thought this was ridiculous when I was young. I did. I thought it was wholly ridiculous because she did things that were just very puzzling to me. So, for example, if anyone would come to our house, we were hungry much of the time, as you might imagine. And if someone would come to our house, she would offer them our food. This was infuriating because we had not enough food, and yet she would offer food to others. And then, if we happened to go to somebody else's house, she always made it clear that we were never permitted to take their food because they probably needed it. And so that was the way that these teachings over time kind of ingrained in me without my understanding that it was there. That there was a certain way to be in the world as a decent person, right? And she cared more than anything else, as poor as we were, as hated as we were, she cared more than anything in the world that we be good people. So as I grew older, I began to understand it more, but I have to say, not fully enough until after she died. So when I was 15 years old, my mother died. The worst experience of my life, and the most jolting, certainly, of my life, because it forced me to confront all of the things about all of the things that I had ignored for 15 years. Because suddenly when you lose someone, when they're there every day, you don't pay much attention to them. And then when they're gone, suddenly you remember everything about them. You remember what they said to you. You're actively working to bring that back. And that's when I began to understand what a gift I had been given. And so I started trying to live that when I was 15, 16 years old. And that's when I took it up on myself to shape my life and my journey to make sure that I was doing the proper things to be a good person.
That's incredible. Do you have thoughts on people who don't, students, others who may not have or feel they have a community, a support system? Thoughts on what they should do, how they might find
Everybody
one?
has a support system. But yeah, they probably just don't know and don't do the work of looking around them. But everybody has a
So
support
get to
system.
work, get to work.
It's work for us to do that. I have students who come to me and say, well, I remember this student at Smith. I'll never forget this. She came to my office one day and said, I really want to talk to you. I'm desperately unhappy here. And I was so terrified because I thought she was in such danger. And I wanted to comfort her. And the only way I could comfort her was to say, okay, now, please understand that you can transfer, okay? It's not the end of the world. Lots of people transfer to different institutions. So let's just sit and talk about what would be the best place for you. So we had a discussion, nice discussion about where she might go to be happy. And I said, well, we'll continue this conversation, so come back in a little while and we'll talk some more and then try to meet the deadlines for your applications. But then I grew very concerned. She didn't come back. And I was so worried about her mental state. And then I glimpsed her walking across campus. And I called her and I said, why didn't you come back? I've been worried about you. Why have you not come back so we could talk about your transfer? And she said, President Simmons, I'm so embarrassed. I love it here. She had not found that group yet. And so eventually, we all have the potential to find that group to which we belong and on whom we can rely. Because living in community is what we do, but we're often lousy at it. And right now, imagine living in community, in a small community, then imagine trying to live in a community as large as a country, where you have so many different types of people. People who think differently, people who look differently, people who are nuisances, people who talk crazy. You've got all kinds mixed together in this thing that we have to do together. Imagine that. So I often say that we spend our time insisting that people get licenses to drive, licenses to, to have a dog, licenses for everything. We read up on everything, but we don't take the care to learn how to be in community with others. I don't understand that. And so I say to my students, you have an obligation to learn how to be in community with people you don't like, with people who are different from you, with people who are not going to say to you every day that you're the most wonderful person in the world. So many young people are brought up craving that praise, expecting it. They go to college and somebody says to them, this work is not good, and they fall apart because they have never had to hear that their work is not good, because what do we do with our children? We tell them that they're wonderful. And then teachers tell them they're wonderful. And so they have this diet of wonderfulness. And yet they get into the world and discover that there are people who hate them. And they don't know what to do with that.
Did you experience any of that when you went off to college too?
Well, I think people experienced it with me because I was impossible. By the time I went off to college, I was certain that everything was wrong with the world. And to make it worse, my freshman year of college, the President of the United States was assassinated. And I can't tell you what that does to a person, a young person, to know that things are that unstable in the world that you live in, where the most gloriously wonderful person can be assassinated. So I wanted to fix the world, and my way of fixing the world was always with my mouth, okay? And so I did this constantly. I made a nuisance of myself in college. My college had a requirement that we go to chapel, and I declared I won't do it. They said, well, why won't you do it? I said, because this is a Protestant service. What if we have Muslims here? What if we have Jewish students here? What if we have other religious practitioners? Are you going to make them go to a Protestant service? So if that's the case, I am hereby boycotting chapel. And I did. So much so that they informed my family when I was a senior that I couldn't graduate because I hadn't met the chapel requirement. But I had so many causes when I was a college student. Everything that was wrong, I wanted to point it out. Okay, every offense, I wanted to point it out, and I was impossible. And I continued that well into my career, by the way. Very outspoken. I never wanted to see us relive the period of my youth. I never wanted people to be treated the way that I was treated as a child. And that meant it was my responsibility to be involved. It was my responsibility to say to people who did not get it, if you force non-Protestants to go to a Protestant service, you are doing the same thing to them that was done to me because of my race. So I don't know, I know it sounds irrational now, but it meant a lot to me at the time. It meant a lot to me at the time. And so I was called one day to the President's house. Are you ever called to the President's house? Don't go if you're called, okay? So I was called one day to the President's house, so I went over to the President's house, and I knew I was getting kicked out. I just knew that was it. But he had found another solution: to send me away. And so he asked me if I would go on a study away program because I needed to represent the university. It was very clever, wasn't it?
Yes,
Yeah,
very clever.
Yeah. So you want to get
brilliant.
rid of a student, find something good for them to do, and send them off, right? And so I went away, but that didn't help my problem with the chapel, because when I came back to finish up, they still held the chapel thing against me and didn't want me to graduate. But a very fortunate thing happened, and this for students, keep this in mind. If you are an activist and you run your mouth all the time and people are just so tired of it, the best thing you can do is to work hard and to be so good that you cannot be denied. Because what happened to me was in my senior year, when they told me I couldn't graduate because of chapel, I won a Danforth Fellowship and a Fulbright Fellowship. And the university couldn't figure out how they could announce that if I didn't graduate. So work hard and make sure that you're Teflon when it comes to that. But you know, I gradually accrued a sense with my coursework, which was very important, learning about other people. I'm on a tear. I've got to learn about other people. This is the single most important thing to me. So when I was 17, not telling my family much about it at all, I decided to get on a Greyhound bus and go to Mexico to live with a Mexican family and study Spanish. And that started me on a path to trying to learn about the world. I was desperately looking for a way, I think, to love my country. I couldn't when I was young because it was too cruel. And I saw what it had done to my parents and to everybody I loved. It was hard to love this country. So I needed some perspective, and somehow I understood that as a young person. I needed to get outside the country. So I started first with Mexico, and then in my junior year going to stay with a family in France. And as I made my way, I came closer to understanding the complex ways in which civilizations come into being and culture forms, and the very imperfect ways in which they form. And so once I began to understand that and how flawed the world is generally, when I came back, I started understanding that there were things I could do here, and that by doing those things and trying to make things better, I had a way of learning to love my home. And so that's really what motivated me to start working on behalf of different communities and trying to get things done to help others. It was a way for me to be united with the place that I was from. And I think that was probably a good way to do it.
Thank you for sharing that. I want to talk a little bit about the power of mentorship. And you are known, lots of people I come across are like, oh, they came up through Ruth Simmons' shop. And I don't know if you know them or don't, but they were there at the same time as you at Brown or at Smith, and they just talk about you and the work that you did and trying to model their own after yours. Is mentoring an art, a science? Can anyone do it? Should everyone do it? Can you just talk a little bit about it? And
first of all, I never tried to be a mentor. I try to live my values. And what I hope students recall is that they could see my values in what I did every day. That alignment just seemed essential to me for my health and for my dedication to living out what my mother wanted. So what I did learn later in life is that many people were very kind to me and helped me along the way, right? But they helped me in the way that so many people help others, by saying lovely things and encouraging me. It was not until I ran up against people who were willing to tell me that I wasn't perfect, that I needed to do things, that I came to understand how valuable that kind of mentorship was. And what I learned is that it wasn't just Black people who could influence me, that it wasn't just highly educated people who could influence me, that I could be influenced by a wide range of people. And so I found, for example, that when I was, once I had become an administrator, that a man named Aaron Lemonick, who was a Jewish man from Philadelphia, who had hired me at Princeton, and I had a very uncomfortable interaction with him. And that is, I did some work for him, and he told me it was the worst thing he'd ever seen, ever. And to emphasize how awful it was, we were in the office together after 5 o'clock, so just the two of us, and to emphasize how awful the work was, he kicked the file cabinet. And he was a very big person, you know, and so I was shocked. I didn't remember at that point anybody ever doing that to me. So I, you know, predictably, as I always say, went back to my office and put my head on the desk and cried, of course. But then I got up and did it over. And the reason that that is so important to me is the person who is most responsible for my becoming a college president is Aaron Lemonick, because he believed in me, he supported me, but he would not lie to me. So I began to understand that there are people in your life who don't lie to you, and how much value they bring to you because they don't say things to you to make you feel good. They say things to make you better. Tremendous. And then, you know, I had numerous instances of people who were not, you know, necessarily people who, you know, told me wonderful things, but also who just happened to be willing to talk to me and to share an experience with me that made me better in some measure by talking to me. And these are often people who had radically different ideas from me. For example, I remember, I think I might have told you this, I remember when I was president of Brown, a very influential alum of Brown came to see me to talk about my work at Brown and to tell me about his hopes for Brown. And so he came in and he said that he wanted to tell me that he thought there were too many women in top positions at Brown, and he thought there were too many minorities at Brown. And so, I mean, what do? You're president, he's an influential alumnus. But then I thought, wow, he's willing to come and sit across from me and look at my face as a woman, and as a black woman, and tell me what he just told me. So I said, well, thank you for being candid with me. Obviously, I think you're very wrong in what you're saying, but I'm very glad that you're willing to talk to me about it. That person became someone that I became friends with. Hard to imagine. So I've learned most in my life by being willing to be tested and challenged, and being willing to hear things that I didn't want to hear.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a question about, you talk about values, and I just want to talk about education, access to education, higher education. And it has changed, the challenges have changed over time. Maybe history repeats itself. But can you just talk a little bit about what the biggest challenges you think higher education is facing today? Or some of the challenges.
Well, I think one big challenge that we face today in higher education is that, like so many other institutions, so many are losing confidence in us. I think we're going to have to work very hard as a sector to overcome that. And it's going to be very difficult to overcome because we are so many different types of institutions. And because we are so many different types of institutions, we do an incredible range of things. Some of them, no doubt, very bad. And yet, education remains, as they say, the great equalizer. Every child has to have the opportunity to be educated and to think that the possibility exists that they can shape their lives by dint of hard work, willingness to improve, the importance of their character, all of that. Every child in this country should feel that. It's in their hands. It's not in the hands of people who are, drawing a map of who's going to get it and who's not going to get it, okay? And that's why it's so important, even at places like Williams, that we not look down on people because they don't get to go to Williams. It's very important that we validate the path of students who go to community colleges. And it's very important that we be aware of the fact that not every child has access to the same quality of instruction or the same resources that we have access to. And then more than that, that each of us who is well educated, since we should understand more than most, take it upon ourselves to do something for those who have the least in terms of education. Because if we invest in education of a child, we are doing more than anything else we could do to help this country going forward. And so I think that that gap that has developed is going to perhaps widen before it gets better. But we have to be on our best behavior in higher education going forward. Because the impulse to regulate and over-regulate has surfaced, and I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. The idea that a private wealth person knows how to run a university is preposterous on the face of it. And yet, there are many people who have no knowledge of education who believe that they should insert themselves into the process and dictate what happens in universities. And that's what we have now. Whether politicians, I live in the state of Texas, and and the state of Texas, we have a governor who has decided that he knows best for children and for education, and has mandated all kinds of things that take place in universities in Texas. So I would say, as I said earlier tonight, those of us in universities, those of us who care about universities, have got to be strong in this moment. Nobody gets to sit on the sidelines when universities become the battlefield for people who want to exercise their own political views. That should not be permitted. And everybody has to be in the fray in order to prevent it from going too far.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask one more question or so, and I'd like to know, because I know you say no often when people ask you to do things. So we're, again, grateful that you said yes to coming here. But how have you decided, because you've left your mark in so many different places, not just educational institutions, the Federal Reserve, this board, that board, how have you made decisions and accepted opportunities to do those things and leave your mark in other places and industries?
Well, I like to think that I avoid being doctrinaire. And as a university president, I've always felt that we have to be a part of the world. And that we're better off as institutions if we lead across a variety of sectors. And so I have been involved with corporations. As you say, I'm chairing the Federal Reserve Board in Houston now. I serve on nonprofit boards. I do a lot in education and so forth, because I want to move about for a number of different reasons. First, because I'm still learning. Secondly, because I want people to listen to me. And if corporations will have me come and lecture to them, then I want to be able to do that. And if I can give a talk at the Federal Reserve Bank, I want to do that. And so on, because there is no one area that is deserving of the benefits of what education affords. And so I want to be available to a lot of different audiences to make sure that we are very much involved in how this country moves forward. And we need it now more than ever, I would say. You know, I was thinking recently, when I was a child, I remember, of course, vividly, the civil rights struggle. And I was remembering the integration of schools in Alabama and in Arkansas. And I was remembering the governor of Arkansas standing and blocking the door when black students were entering for the first time. And I thought, well, that was in the 63. Yeah. And now, how many years later?
Not that many.
Here we are again, seeing the same thing. I remember parents in Alabama spitting on black children entering schools in Alabama and shouting racist slogans to those children. And here we are again, dividing ourselves. And using hateful terms to each other. How evolved are we? Not evolved enough. And so I believe that the greatest help that can come to us is in the form of education. Because if you're educated, you have a much better chance of being able to think for yourself and being able to reason. That doesn't mean all educated people do that well, but you have a better chance of it. My students used to ask me all the time, and another reason that I wrote my book is, why aren't you angry? And some of my students want me to be angry. But I've never been able to figure out what that does. Where does that take us as a country if we're angry at each other? I don't get it. So if I have to work on myself, I'll work on myself. If I have to say to my students, go and work on yourself, I'll say that to my students, because the worst thing in the world would be for this democracy to be destroyed by people who finally didn't get it. That we're in it together, and we have to work together to get through everything. So anyway, that's enough of that. But that's how I feel.
That's it. And that's with the belief that there's a common goal of getting through.
Yeah.
I want to ask if we should take some questions. I don't know if there's a mic in the audience. Maybe? Okay, there is. Okay, so we'll maybe take a couple of questions for Dr. Simmons. If you raise a hand, or, okay. Sure. Okay, we have a mic coming.
Thank you so much for everything that you've shared tonight and for being here. I have so many questions for you because you have been such a role model. And I'll start with a community building one of when you got to Brown 2 years in, you had Brown look at their slave history. Could you talk a little bit about what kind of consensus building you had to, in 2 short years, to make that happen? And then
To make what happen?
to be able to have that go institution-wide and end up having the impact that it did on Brown and then on other institutions?
What she's asking, what was it? We couldn't hear. What was it specifically?
In 2002, when you had Brown look at its slave history, and you...
Slavery, okay.
Yeah.
I never heard, yeah.
Yeah. And then I had another question just about, well, a couple of things about what your thoughts were with what happened to the president of Harvard, and then also about the College Board and its AP and its effect on American history in our high schools, on the curricula. So just a few easy ones.
Okay.
We got 3 questions. You took all 3 questions. So, because we only have time for a few questions. So just,
Well, I'll deal with slavery first. Anyone who understands the history of the country understands that we have not really had access to the full history of our nation. And when I got to Brown, an innocent question arose. Was Brown in any way connected to the slave trade? And I was, unfortunately, I'm not a historian, I was surprised by that question, and I went about trying to find the answer. And so the first thing I did was to go to ask people who should know, and they said no, there was no connection whatsoever. And then I went to the books about the history of Brown, and there was no information in the histories that had been written. And so, but there was this lingering issue with these institutions, the colonial institutions, and what they were doing during the slave trade. So I thought, well, we should at least do the thing that universities must do, and that is know our history and tell the truth. And one of the things that I've often tried to do in my leadership roles is to find my way to the most unimpeachable course. Because I've always felt that if you can find your way to that, no matter what it is, in the long run, that's a winning position to be in. So what I thought was the winning position to be in was that universities should tell the truth. So I was not prepared to lie and say there was no connection because I didn't know that to be the case. And I was not willing to say, let's let it go, because people don't need to know. And so that's what I maintained, that we were after the truth. Some people didn't trust that because they thought that it was about recrimination. And this was particularly so because we had members of the Brown family involved actively with the university, whom I knew and conversed with all the time. And people found that awkward to dig into slavery when the Brown family itself might be implicated in the story. But still, the unimpeachable course was bigger than a single individual, and so we pursued it. It was difficult at first, but we were helped immensely by several things. The first was we were led by a Southern historian named Jim Campbell and Tony Bogues, who had deep knowledge of slavery. And we were also helped by the fact that we had, the Brown family was devoted to Brown. And that caused them to leave everything to Brown. And they left the most amazing things. They left artifacts. They left records. And we actually had a treasure trove of information about their dealings. And so early on, the committee organized exhibits showing manacles from slave ship, showing logs of slave ships, showing examples of artifacts from the trade and so forth. And so it became incontrovertible from this evidence that there was something there, and things died down pretty quickly. At the same time, the New York Historical Society did an exhibition on slavery in Manhattan. So here we were in New England with Northerners finally facing up to slavery and their involvement in slavery. And it became something that, started to sweep over us, that we were onto something that was important to do. The only question was whether we could do it well and not slip into the kind of thing that people were most fearful of. So I think they did a good job of it, and my only responsibility was to say what I thought was not possible when the committee brought me things that I thought we couldn't take on. And so I remember they came to me and asked me and required an apology for slavery.
Thank you.
And I said, tell me how that works, okay? I am going to apologize for slavery. How does that work? No. So I could get away with that because I said, come on, my great-grandparents were slaves. I'm not apologizing for slavery. But most of what they had to say was quite sensible. And so we ended up doing really a great service, I think, to the country by doing it, because, as you know, there have been many imitations, hundreds since then, around the world, actually, not just in this country. We can take on difficult things without question. And it's the job of universities to take on difficult questions. I didn't find it that difficult to do at the time. I know that subsequently lots of institutions have found it difficult to do. But I think we were just fortunate that we had very excellent leadership on the commission, and that we had enough evidence in place that we didn't have to work very hard to convince people that there was a story there worth telling. On the Harvard thing, I think it's a bit of an object lesson. On how universities are not separated from the world. We are in the world. We are of the world. And so when things happen in the world, we are going to be in it. The question of what we do about that is the question. When I was at Brown, Brown students are very engaged with all kinds of issues. And so every other week they'd come and say, Ruth, we want you to make a statement on X. And I would say, I do not make statements. Okay? My belief is that as an institution, it ought to be clear from everything you're doing, from everything that you posit, where you stand on every issue. And nobody should have to ask that question. And I felt very strongly that people ought to, and I had no problem personally, having views on certain things. But I would not, for the institution, make public statements about something that people wanted me to make statements about. But I do think it's extremely important for us to watch what we do. Because what we do is what we are. And so every day, every decision you make about what you're going to do on a university campus. I remember when I first got to Brown, we had this gentleman who had published in the campus newspaper that blacks should feel very lucky that they had been rescued from Africa and been enslaved. So he put an ad in the newspaper saying this. The Republicans on campus invited him to campus to give a talk. This enraged a lot of students, and they came to me and demanded that I cancel the talk. And I said, why would I cancel the talk? He can come to campus and talk. And people have the opportunity to question him. We do that all the time with speakers. Why would we do that here? Well, because his views are so objectionable. And so I said, well, listen, I'm a descendant of slaves. If I can go and sit in an audience and hear him say vile things you can certainly do that too. So I went to the talk, and I sat in the audience, and I heard objectionable things to show my students that this is what you actually have the ability to do. And then when there's a Q&A, you get to stand up and say what you want to say. That's the way it works. So I think in the Harvard instance, we have a series of things that occurred that put together offer one narrative. But they're things that are put together that would ordinarily not have been put together, except for a heinous act that led to a war, and the fact that the president happened to be a black person that people didn't want as president of Harvard. And those things came together so that it was an opportunity. So opportunists took advantage of that, in my view, and decided that this was a way to attack universities and to change the order of things in universities, because we've gone too far. You've got all these, as my friend said, we've got all these women in senior places, you know, and there's all this diversity. What's happened to our universities, okay? And so that's not a happy story for some people. And what do you do when you want to upend things? You look for that confluence of things, and you make your way in if you can. And I think that people have taken advantage of it to do exactly that. And I also think that this means that all of us are on alert for what will happen to higher education, because we've been able to see the dissatisfaction with us and the fact that people are determined to come after us and to change the order of things on these campuses, okay? What are you doing having a Claiming Williams Day? Okay, that's, what do they say? It's the wokeism of the moment just drives some people over the edge. And they want to make sure that universities are not venues where you can sit around and talk about how you feel put upon and how society is unfair to you and so forth. They don't want that. They don't want the diversity that we're seeing in universities now. They're making that very, very clear, because to them, to many of them, diversity is inferior, right? And so I remember saying to Claudine Gay before she was installed, you have a problem. And it doesn't have anything to do with you. It has to do with what you represent. And so I think we all knew she was going to have a problem. Even if none of the rest of it happened, we knew that she was going to have a problem. That's the state of affairs in the world. And that's why everybody should not feel that they can sit on the sidelines. Because we're fighting for the future of the country. And if we want it to be the place where people can live peacefully together, we have got to stand up and do what's right, and to say, we are a country of many, and we will learn to work with each other and not to fight with each other.
We don't want to cut you off. You can keep talking if you want.
No.
No. Well, I'm not sure. Do you want to take another question, or?
Sure.
Okay. Is there another question? Some student? Oh, there's several other questions. We've got, okay, someone has a mic back there.
Yeah, hi. I had a I had I guess a pondering on your commentary on anger and your commentary on anger as it relates to your comments on community and as you just talked about, like the spirit of working together, and as it relates to your own personal story, but also like the history of accessibility and higher education spaces and like desegregation. That is all brought about by like a series of anger turned and manifested as agitation. And so I guess, how do you react to like the idea that maybe anger is what we need, like as a manifestation of agitation rather than a perversive spirit of like working together?
Okay, thank you for that, and for giving me an opportunity to clarify. When I say anger, I mean an overwhelming sense that I am entitled to certain kinds of behavior and actions because of what has been done to me. Okay? That's what I mean. And so I'm entitled not to be open to learning about different people. I'm entitled not to care about every child in this country because people didn't care about me. I'm entitled, and so forth. So the kind of massive and unspecific targeting of people because you're angry about what happened to you is what I have a problem with. What I don't have a problem with is the activism that arises from a sense that things need to change and that we are responsible as members of the community for caring about and acting on the urge to see change occur. That's very different to me from the kind of amorphous anger that is entitled anger because you've been dealt with unjustly. There's such magnificent stories that I see, and I'm floored by. I saw recently that this man there's so many like this, was unjustly imprisoned for most of his life. And he was found not guilty after serving all this time behind bars. And people asked him about whether or not he was angry. And he said, no, I'm not angry. And he wasn't angry because what helped him to be released was people who cared about and pursued his innocence to the point where he was finally granted release from prison. My point is that unmitigated anger doesn't give you the opportunity to form those alliances, to build the relationships, to learn about what might be helpful to you in the end. And that's what I mean. It doesn't mean that I don't think that people who are truly engaged and activists shouldn't be. And I certainly don't believe that because I consider myself one of those people. I run my mouth endlessly in the state of Texas, okay? I fight with people all the time about things that are unjust. I speak my mind, but hopefully people never take that as anger. They take it as what it is, and that is a resistance to doing things that are evil, and that are contrary to what we ought to be doing as human beings. And so, I have some degree of luck with that because, as I say, I was surprised. And most of you probably don't know, but I resigned from my last position in protest because a board of dyed-in-the-wool Texans mandated that I could not make appointments at Prairie View. They had a set of things that they wanted to do for this HBCU that were inferior things and unjust things. And they told me that this is what I had to accept. And I refused to accept it. And I said, I resigned. And then I resigned, but most importantly, I told my students that there is a group of people who would like to believe that you are not as good as the students at Texas A&M, that you're not as deserving as they, and they would like to limit the possibilities for this institution, and I will not be a party to that because I respect this institution, I respect you too much. So I run my mouth, and people may interpret that as anger, but it isn't anger at all. It is conviction about what is right and what is wrong. And so be active, challenge things that you see that are unjust, do the right thing whenever possible, but don't bring with it the rage that is destructive, because that can do more destruction than what you're trying to counter. It's up to you.
Okay. Oh.
Somebody's waving over there. Are you
that's
saying
Clinton.
that's enough? People do that to me all the time. Okay.
Is that okay with you? Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Simmons.